You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody. Happy October. Here we are kicking off our month of documentaries. And if you didn't listen to last week's episode, we are going to kick it off with the 2005 movie Murderball. It's not as scary as it sounds. Well, maybe to some people it might be scary.
There are no murders in Murderball.
There are not. To all their mothers, I think it would be scary.
Yeah.
If you were a teenager in 2005, you probably remember this movie. I think if you are a millennial, maybe not. It feels very of the era, but tell me if I'm wrong. Write in and tell me if I'm wrong. Christy at dodgemediaproductions.com. The director is Harry Alex Rubin and Dana Adams Shapiro. It stars Joe Soares, Keith Cavell, Mark Zupan. It was filmed in Virginia, Texas, Rhode Island, Florida, Alabama, Greece, Sweden, and Vancouver, BC. Did you hear how I said Alabama?
Alabama.
It's like
Alabama. Okay. Write in Mike at dodgemediaproductions.com if you know that callback.
Yeah, you'll get a prize.
You get a prize of some sort.
It's like an onomatopoeia. Like you can't say Alabama. Without throwing in a little twang.
Yeah, shout out to Shirley, who lives outside of Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah.
Hi, Shirley.
This is a Paramount Pictures and MTV Films. I think I saw it on MTV.
I'm pretty sure we did,
yeah. Yeah. It did get the Oscar nomination for Best Doc in 2005.
Got a nom.
It got a nom. The synopsis of this film is quadriplegics who play full contact rugby in wheelchairs. I mean, come on, we were together.
It almost seems like it's a joke when you say, oh yeah, quadriplegics in wheelchairs play rugby, right?
It sounds like a Johnny Knoxville movie.
That's a great tie-in. Awesome co-hosting there, because there were some parts of this that I saw that were not in the movie, but I believe was when Mark Zupan hung out with the Jackass guys. And I was surprised at some of the things that I remembered as being in the movie were actually, I think, in the Jackass footage. But one of the things that he mentions is one of the characters, Zupan, he's one of the main characters in the documentary. He, in his wheelchair, goes off of a table at a bar. He basically jumps. And he said, well, what else is going to happen? I'm already a quadriplegic. And I thought, wow, that is exactly the mindset difference between those quad rugby players and everyone else, is because they're thinking, well, I've already had the bad crippling part happen, so nothing else to lose.
I totally agree with you, but I have this non-substantiated thought that they're kind of, did you ever have like a toy or something and it was barely holding on, and so you just played with it really gingerly because you were afraid if you jarred it too much, then that would just end it all?
Yeah, sure.
That's kind of how I approach them. It's just like, oh no, you're already a little wounded. Like,
right.
Don't make it worse.
I think it's two sides of the same coin. I could argue that old people should drive as fast as possible because they have so little time left, and they don't. But yes, I think if I was in that situation, I think I would probably err on the side of extra caution because I've already lost some and I don't want to make it worse.
Yeah.
But they are rugby players, so one might argue that their perspective on physical pain and injury is a little off from the normal.
Hey, they get to do what they want.
Hey, they can do exactly whatever they want, and they're certainly capable. That's, I think, the thing that is amazing about this is that people who have significant limitations in the eyes of normal kind of everyday people who have no experience with this, then to watch them be successful at sport, but also, contact. And I think in our mind's eye, right, we just think kind of, oh, well, you've been hurt before, so you must be fragile or something.
Yeah, no, that's definitely where I'm coming from, which is not what they would want.
Well, and if you look at a lot of them, their injuries, actually, I would argue they're not fragile because they survived things that I think would kill a normal person.
Wow, that's a really good perspective.
So they've already been filtered for being survivors mentally and physically. Yeah,
literally
tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally agree.
So they are badass.
They are very badass. Let's see. They overcome unimaginable obstacles to compete in the Paralympic Games in Athens, Greece. The tagline of this film is dream, believe, achieve. Mike, kick us off. What's the pickup line of this film?
I've been out to clubs. I've been out all over the place, and people say, it's good to see you out. And I think that really actually is a good opening line. because that, to me, is one of the messages of the documentary, is that they can do more than people think.
Mm-hmm.
And the documentarians throughout the film keep touching on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I thought was interesting, and I've seen this with other groups who have been historically marginalized that people are trying to bring into the fold, there's this thought that they're paragons in some way. And there's a great scene where they're interviewing Mark Zupan's high school buddies in a bar. And one of his friends says, oh no, Mark was an asshole before he was in a wheelchair. And you see these characters, these people that they show, but they are characters. They're just normal people. And some of them are nice and some of them are not so nice. They have foibles, they have flaws. They're capable of being assholes as well as capable of playing sport. So I think ultimately, to me, this film is uplifting because it shows that people who have had these injuries are still just people. I found it fascinating. It was a documentary about people who happen to have something in common. To me, that was kind of the through line that I saw in the film.
Mm-hmm. That anger was evident with the former American player, now, well, then Canadian coach.
Temporarily.
Yeah. Talking about being, an asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was rough. So what I thought was really fascinating is when they kicked off the movie, they kind of go over the rules of the game.
Right, which you have to do because nobody knows.
Right. And the thing that was kind of made me squirm, I guess, a little bit,
right.
but kind of does make sense, is that each player is given a point.
I thought that's what you're going to say.
They're given like a number, basically, that assesses their ability. Is it how many limbs? Because it was 1 to 4, wasn't it?
I don't think it was so much limbs as capabilities, right?
Right. So maybe it was like how much your hand open and closed.
Right.
Was that one of them?
Yeah, I think they said it was like, half a point was if you could close your hand, if you could grip better as opposed to just a paddle. And then it was how much mobility you had in your arms and different things. I forget the specifics.
Right. And so the reasoning behind this is to level the playing field.
Right, and make it fair.
Each team cannot have more than 8 points on the court. So your players, with all of their different abilities, to even you out or to an attempt to even you out, everybody would be at this 8. They showed them on the screen and they had their number underneath them, like a 1 or a 3. And at first, just to assign a number to a person is a little... But I also can see that quickly, I bet people... But these guys would probably game the system if there wasn't that, right? You would get, oh, can your hand open? All right, well, you're on our team. Kind of they would just naturally.
Hyper competitive people.
Yeah.
Like when you put them, let's not call it cheating. They're going to innovate on how they score those points.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it'd be fascinating. Imagine if in the NBA they said you could only have 32 feet on the court at any one time, right? But if you look at racing, they often have weight, where they say each vehicle must weigh at least this much. So it is kind of a fascinating perspective. But isn't that interesting? Because I think what you're getting at is the numbers, we can make a greater than or less than comparison. I think that's what makes you feel uncomfortable. That you're going to look at Bob and say, because you have paddles for hands instead of digits, then you are somehow more or less than another person. I think that's what kind of triggers in us.
Yeah.
Our whole lives, right? What we've been trying to fight against is considering them to be inferior in some sense.
Well, reducing someone down to a number. But as I say that out loud, I think in football, they tell you the guy's height and weight.
They do.
So why does that not bother me when I see a roster and it lists well, now, speaking as the chubby kid, honestly, I do remember a day reading the U of O roster and seeing like a guy that came up like over 3 bills and thinking, oh, poor guy. They put his weight right there.
Right. Although in his case, I'm just saying when I played football, we innovated on those numbers in the program. So
I'm calling out my own hypocrisy that I didn't squirm when I saw the roster at the football game, but seeing those paraplegics or quadriplegics on the screen with the number below them made me squirm.
Well, I think because I'm not sure whether the numbers go up or down based on, your dexterity, but I could see it, let's say, a 4 was the most, I guess, agile,
right.
let's say. And then it went down to Bob, maybe he was a 0.5 or something. It just naturally, it's like, oh, well, then a normally abled person would be a 10 or something. It feels like you're ranking them. I mean, I think, I see where you're coming with the height and weight, but I think in this case, very much, I see where you're going. I didn't have that reaction, but I totally see it.
So that was interesting just to learn how, and they play it hard. I mean, these guys are, I mean, they take rugby. Oh, and they play it on a basketball court. So we're not on a grassy field that if you fall, you just kind of like maybe rub into the dirt a little bit. Like you're falling out of a wheelchair, crashing into another wheelchair, and sometimes being capsized out of your wheelchair.
Well, many of them strap their legs in so they don't fall out, but that means when the chair tips over,
you go.
Yeah, you go head first. You can't kind of get your butt.
And I don't remember any helmets.
Oh, no.
But once again, I guess they're like...
They would argue,
What's the point?
What's the worst that could happen?
They also go into the different types of accidents or birth defects, or like one guy had polio.
You know what I found fascinating, and this is, again, credit to the documentarians, was the variety of different causes. So you would think, I mean, let me rephrase that. I thought at least going into it, oh, these are all going to be football or wrestler or rugby players who got a spinal injury because they were driving drunk.
Like former athletes, you're saying?
Right. I assume they were all like collegiate athletes who got drunk and had an accident. But some of the players had this from birth, right? The fellow who had polio was from a young age. But then I was thinking of the guy who had some horrible blood disorder that was from almost birth, right?
Was that meningitis?
I thought he said it was a variant of that or somehow related. But that was another thing that was fascinating. The other thing that I thought was very interesting, which is a commonality between them all, is the mental part of it. And of course, there's no way to imagine what that would be like. But I found that I really didn't even guess at how difficult the mental aspect of it was. And they talk about that. And again, fantastic filmmaking. They found a young man who was a motocross rider, so an athlete.
This was such a good part.
And he was early in his recovery because he'd crashed
He was still like at the hospital doing PT.
Yeah. He was at the beginning of his journey, and they talked about the mental challenges ahead of him. And the documentarians had what I thought was a really good scene of him moving into his first apartment outside of kind of the hospital setting. And it had to be accommodated for his various challenges.
Let me set the scene just a little bit.
Okay, go.
His girlfriend and his mother are in the room, and you can tell that they went to Target. Maybe now they would have gone to Bed Bath & Beyond.
Yeah.
They spruced it up. They brought all his favorite things. And mom has such a look of, this is going to solve everything. Kind of just, she has built up this moment and cannot wait to show him her labors. Okay, go.
And the mom and the girlfriend are standing there expectantly like Christmas morning.
Yep.
And he rolls up and he looks in at, I think it was the bathroom. They had like a little shower area, and it had, a seat and handles and the things you would need. And he says, "This sucks." And his mom's kind of crushed, like, what do you mean? Like, we did a great job. And he just needs a moment to kind of start to process that he's back out in the real world. And not that he thought his injuries were not real, but it just kind of drove home like, this is the rest of your life. You're going to have to deal with this. And it's, again, fantastic filmmaking, tip of cap to the editor, because then later when he first meets the quad rugby team and Zupan, he asks, well, if I walk again, can I still play? And you can tell that the players all know everyone goes through that. You're never going to walk again, but you tell yourself for a while until you really kind of come to grips with it. It was that part of the journey I liked, because I think if they'd focused on that, if the documentary had been on that, it would have been too hard for me to watch. It would have been, but watching it in that context allowed me, as a person who doesn't like to cry while watching documentaries, to see that kind of aspect of it. So it was really good, I thought. Yeah.
So this one, we're kind of bouncing all around, but...
Oh, yeah, we are.
So the cinematography of this was super rough, especially... I mean, it's so, we take for granted that people can go out and get DSLRs. Like, we're going to talk about Sriracha in a couple weeks, and I am pretty sure he just did that on a DSLR. he maybe had something a little bit bigger, but he could have, like the quality, it could have easily been a DSLR camera. These guys had to have had in 2005. I mean, did they have like the old fashioned? I mean, were they still using film probably?
No, it was digital. Wikipedia said they had a Panasonic of some sort. It looks like the next level up from a DSLR. It was very simple.
It doesn't look that good though. I mean, I'm spoiled. To me, it looks like what I used to use in the 1980s to make silly commercials with my uncles.
Right. So there's a couple things I think that factor into that. One is I think they were new. This is their first film.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and you can see this, they had one camera and no real permission. So they were standing wherever. It is a lot of handheld.
Yeah, running and gunning.
And it's pretty rough in some points relative to what we expect now.
Right.
But you brought up a good point. Has the field of independent filmmaking raised its standards? So if we went back in 2005, would anybody have noticed?
I think I didn't notice at the time. And I mean, I wasn't into film, but I kept watching it. Now, I will say I've been a little hard on the filmmakers. I will say this was pre-GoPro. Oh, no, we looked it up. There was a GoPro the year before, but I bet it would have been like prohibitive or they wouldn't have.
Who would have known
They
about
wouldn't have spent it.
Yeah.
But they did a great job in the actual matches. That was fabulous. And then we caught some really great in-camera editing.
Yes.
Because I think it was Keith, the guy.
Yes, the motocross guy.
Yeah, the motocross guy that you were talking about. His dad, I think, is bringing out the motorcycle. Was it the motorcycle?
Yeah, it was the motorcycle he crashed on.
Oh, geez. Like, come on, Dad. But his dad goes, do you want to see this?
Yeah.
And so from behind Keith, it's a close, I mean, it's not a purposeful close-up, but it's almost like the filmmaker is basically standing behind him. But what happens is you're right behind his neck, which is where the scar is from the surgery that they did to try to repair him.
Yeah.
So you see this close-up of the scar on the back of his neck, and then it pans over to the dad bringing the motorcycle around. It's one of those amazing things that, I mean, that's not a happy accident. That's somebody who knew what they were doing.
Yeah, I would certainly hope so.
So kudos. I mean, for everything I said about the camera, for the quality, I mean, they did really good stuff.
I think, though, that it does show that you don't have to have the most expensive equipment to make a good film to tell that story.
Absolutely.
Right. And we talk a little bit about, you were saying, like, Sriracha, was it shot on this, that, or the other? You could shoot it on your iPhone, especially now smartphones have such good cameras. Realistically, that's better than the Super 8 that somebody had, 60 years ago.
Right.
So you can tell these stories, and I like that they just did it. They didn't have the equipment. They maybe had, I don't know if they'd gone to film school or whatever, but they certainly didn't have the huge budget. And we talked about on the budget where we think most of it was spent on travel around the globe, but they made the film anyway. So again, it's a good film, certainly deserved its Oscar nom. Way to go, guys.
Yeah. Sorry if I was coming down too hard.
You weren't, but I was just trying to give them their props.
So a couple of the characters that are definitely standouts is, we've already talked about Mark Zupan and Joe. So Joe is also in a wheelchair. He used to play for America, and he pissed him off, or they pissed him off? Or both?
He got old and they cut him.
And then
he got pissed and he started suing people.
That's right. So then he went to Canada and he was the coach for Canada, largely wanting to beat America.
Yeah.
Because he's bitter and pissed. The documentarians got so lucky because Joe has the least sports kid ever.
He's pretty nerdy. He plays
He's
violin.
He's a sweet kid.
Yeah.
And the heart-wrenching thing is he adores his dad.
You know what's amazing is that kid is, I think, 30 now. But anyway.
And his dad was so, I won't say his dad's a dick, but his dad was so wrapped up into the game that he wasn't seeing his kid.
I would call him a dick.
I knew you would. But I think deep down, Joe did love his kid. Like, at the end, he shows up for him. I'm trying to give him the out. I don't believe people are black and white. I believe people are grays. And I think in this period of his life, Joe was hyper-focused on rugby and maybe needed to realize that there were other blessings in his life.
Okay.
And maybe if he had focused less on rugby, things would have been going better for him.
Yeah, I guess for me, it seems too similar for the stories of sons of famous athletes.
Right,
that hyper-competitiveness, the almost monomaniacal focus on sport, which allows you to be the best at something, it does have its costs. And so the documentarians, maybe more in the edit than in the filming, definitely showed kind of the cost of that. And we know outside of the film that Joe never really found the success that he was hoping for while coaching. And I kind of agree with you that moderation on all things. He maybe takes things a little too far. It was difficult for me to be sympathetic to the character of Joe when you see him just shouting so loud and such like ridiculously aggressive things. But, to be fair to the person, because you said, people are shades of gray, that is the edit. Right.
Yeah.
It's possible that 99% of the time he was gentle.
Right.
And,
we didn't
and
see the
humorous
scenes.
Yeah. I want to allow that this is a character that we're seeing.
Yes.
As opposed to a real person.
Yes. As much as every documentarian, or at least some are good ones, strives to be objective, every audience member needs to realize that by the simple fact of putting together the documentary, they are putting forth their opinion.
Well, you're making choices.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I don't think there is a true objective documentary.
Right. And of course, there are people who would argue there is no objective truth anyway, that it really does depend on your perspective.
Right.
Right.
We're getting deep.
Very deep.
Okay. I just want to say two more things about Joe. We both noted that in the editing, there's a shot of Joe's son watching the game and watching all the players, and then cut to the kid playing the violin. So that very much informs us that he's not a player. He's a spectator. And then this is what he does. And then the other great Joe edit was the kid is literally polishing dad's trophies.
It's annoying to dust my dad's trophy wall. Like, if you have a trophy wall, you need to reconsider your choices, I think.
So that whole B subplot of Joe and his family and his journey.
Right. I must say, though, I'd like to mention to the Academy that if you give me an Oscar, I'm willing to make a trophy wall for it. Just throwing that out there.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so in going with what we've been talking about are some pretty heavy themes with like fathers and sons and the loss of your abilities.
The meaning of life.
This movie lightened it up a little bit.
Yep.
In an awkward way.
This is awesome.
Because now it could be argued that this was necessary for the audience to understand what these what they're going through. Like,
absolutely.
That just like, taking a shower and using the facilities, it's something that we all take us able-bodied people take for granted because we just go in, drop trow, sit down, right? It's no big deal.
Yeah.
So there's videos because sex is a little bit more inventive or needs to be a little bit more acrobatic, let's say, for the partner.
There's some challenges that most people aren't aware of.
Right.
Or
and some of these are very simply demonstrated by, like, for example, in this case, it was a male in the wheelchair. So the female had to lift him up and put him onto the bed. Which of course, that's in a how-to video. That makes total sense.
Makes some degree of sense. Now, Christy, when she's doing this, does she have on a weightlifter's belt and maybe weightlifting gloves and sturdy shoes?
She did not. And you know how I know this so easily?
How's that?
Because she was in her birthday suit.
She was butt naked.
And so that was one of the pauses is, okay, for this instructional video, which is necessary, I can see it. Why does she have to be naked and he was fully clothed?
Because otherwise the gent quadriplegics wouldn't watch it.
You made a joke, but that's probably true.
Yeah, I was making it as a joke, but I realized when I said it, I was probably true. Yeah.
Yeah. So they showed there were two different videos because there were two different women. And in both of them, the women were completely naked. but the dudes still had their clothes on.
I actually think this probably helps every documentary is to put naked women in it, now that I think about it. But related to that, the issue of sexual function, it's also humorous that they air a snippet of a video made by this doctor who could not be less erotic in his. I mean,
he needed Dodge Media Productions to produce his videos.
He completely did. Oh my gosh. I'm just thinking no one is getting excited about any of this, watching this guy in his like easy chair in his office.
They did classic, like in front of the bookcase.
Oh, he's wearing his doctor's coat.
Yeah.
He's just very dry.
Stilted. He had no...
And I don't know that you should be maybe excited or try to go Patch Adams with that subject matter, but you might want to give it a little energy.
Just a little something.
Well, a little life to it, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to get people excited about things.
And give the lady a robe. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Leotard, anything almost.
It could have even been pre-coital. So she could have had her mini skirt and shirt on.
Ooh, there you go.
She's moving him to the bed, and then they're going to get busy, and clothes will come off. We can all do that math. Clothes will come off.
We get that. We understand that.
But especially the position she had to get in order to, heave her boyfriend onto the bed, naked wasn't the most attractive even for that lady.
That's why I brought up the weightlifting belt. I mean, it looks a lot like exercise. So, I mean, if she had been wearing her Olivia Newton-John Let's Get Physical outfit,
that would have...
I could also have seen that.
Right.
But yeah, just naked. What an interesting shot.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was also fully clothed also just made it unintentionally humorous.
Yes. So that took us out of the movie.
A little bit.
And then the second pause, I'll just do them all here while we're here, is we did talk about that scene with Keith, the parents' point of view, where we could imagine that the mom would have been crushed because she would have worked so hard to put his room together, but also his point of view. Like we both very much saw both points of view. And then the third pause was Mike had to display his authority as a cardiothoracic surgeon.
Ooh.
And there was a scene where Joe got so angry that he gave himself a heart attack and had to have a heart procedure. Mm-hmm. Did you guess what it was? I don't think they told. Did he have a stent put in, or I think he had a stent, not a pacemaker.
It could have been a stent. It could have also been a bypass.
Oh, right. And so the doctor was wearing a lead vest. And so Mike explained to me what that lead vest was used for.
So when you're doing things in the heart, you can't really see. So they'll put markers that are opaque to x-rays on the tip of the things that you need to move around in there. And then they have basically an x-ray camera. So the doctors have to wear a lead vest because they're exposed to huge amounts of radiation.
What about everybody else, though? Isn't everybody else exposed to it?
If they're
camera?
If they're in the OR, they would have the lead shield on.
Oh, okay.
But it's unfortunate because these physicians, because they do it so much, even with the protection, they run a much higher risk of cancer.
Oh, bringing the party down, Mike. I did feel like, which I loved, I felt like the crashes with the wheelchairs were enhanced by sound, but that just made them sound like cooler and more fun.
Sure.
The one thing that we loved is during the Olympic game held in Athens, Greece, there's, of course, like the climactic game between Canada and US. And they go completely no sound except for a soundtrack.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you see fans yelling, you see players playing, you see people cheering, you see coaches yelling, you see all of this, but all you hear is kind of like a rousing, slowly building music track. It was a great scene.
I will mention that I have owned the CD of the music from this film since it came out. So it's a great soundtrack in my opinion.
I remember this movie. It was a good, and it holds up. I felt like it held up really good. Okay, so what about a driving review?
Well, I just have one note to our kids at home, our drivers, that I didn't think I would ever have to say, but just a reminder, always wear your prosthetic arms while driving. That's an important safety tip that we learned from Bob. One of the players drives, and he said he got in a wreck, and the police officer asked him, "Were you wearing your arms?" And he said no. Oh. So now he wears his arms all the time while driving.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not what I thought you were going to say.
Okay.
I just thought you were going to warn so that what happened to Zupan didn't happen to anybody.
Oh, that is true. So don't climb in the truck bed of your buddy's truck without him knowing you're back there. It's generally not safe to ride in a truck bed. They don't have seatbelts. You can get thrown out. Bad things can happen. But if you do, make sure that the driver knows that you're in the back so they can make decisions appropriately.
Yep. Should we go to the numbers?
Let's go to the numbers.
Okay. This movie, like I said, came out in 2005. It had a budget of $350,000. And like we said, we think that mostly went to travel because they traveled all around the U.S. and then went to Athens, Greece. They also went to Sweden and then Vancouver, BC. So that's all over the place. It made $1.5 million. So that's
pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And then worldwide 1.7. It has a IMDb score of 7.7, which I think is maybe a touch low, but pretty fair. I mean, almost an 8. I'd give it an 8. It's about an hour and a half long. It's rated R. It's a sports doc. And like I said, we paused 3 times. So there you have it. I would say if you have not ever heard of this movie or you haven't watched it, give it a watch. Like I said, it holds up even 16 years later.
Yeah.
And I think that's it for Murderball, everybody. Join us next week when we will be talking about Slow Ride Home, a great movie with a little bit of a Northwest connection. And join us on all of our socials. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the places. Send us a review, send me an email. I've been getting great emails from our good listener, Ernie. Leo's been chiming in to Mike. We love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much. And don't forget,
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.